We now return to Roy Stories Season 3, Tales from Tewanta, Episode 1, The Situation and the Sign. Wilson Port, Tewanta, 3305, July 11th, 0711 hours, Galactic Standard Time. Commander Austin Graves stepped into his office and closed the door with his elbow. He placed a mug of coffee and a synth meat sandwich on his desk, sat down in his chair, and thumbed on his terminal. He had been tasked by Central Command of Official Tewanta Order to get to the bottom of this recent situation regarding their drop in influence in their home system. He knew the reason already, the BYRNE Protectorate. But he really wanted to figure out the details and, more importantly, what he could do about it. It was important enough that he didn't want to wait until after breakfast. He decided to browse the opposition intel report on the BYRNE Protectorate while eating. He skimmed the introduction. A cooperative mission to protect an endangered ape species. No superpower connections. Nothing he didn't know already from his brief meeting with Progenitor Isley Woodward. He made a point of meeting the leaders of any major group in the system as soon as he could, to form his own impression of them. She seemed friendly enough, idealistic, energetic, a typical hippie type. Though thinking back, she wore a sly, mocking grin when she asked about the view from his office. Bitch. He wasn't going to move from his office without a fight, or hand over the system for that matter. At the time, though, he'd not considered her a threat at all. That was a mistake, he thought. He returned to the report. Finances, strong. For a cooperative with an ecology and environment focus, the BYRNE Protectorate have surprisingly strong finances. Sources of funds are unknown. The confectionery business they run does not account for it, though donations from wealthy donors and the discounts offered by independent pilots may account for their strength. Recommend investing heavily in espionage and intelligence to reduce the uncertainty here. Commander Graves frowned. He was not a fan of independent pilots. They were too unreliable. That the BYRNE Protectorate were making productive use of them was both a good and bad thing in his eyes. Their helpers could possibly be bought off, or may wander off on their own. He read more. Espionage and intelligence, strong. Their staff are loyal, with very good OPSEC habits. This is not out of character with an organization that many imperial systems and fur trading corporations would consider eco-terrorists. He thought, that will make things more challenging. Diplomacy, very strong. As a core strength and ethos of cooperative organizations, this is not surprising, though will make recruiting allies against them difficult. He frowned. He wasn't liking what he was reading. He skipped ahead to the combat capabilities section. Regarding the type of vessels and skill of the pilots on their payroll, the BYRNE Protectorate is on par with the official Tewanta Order. Their fleet is numerically inferior and they have much less spec ops capability on the regular staff. However, independent pilots provide a significant enhancement to their capabilities. A grouping identified by the Pilots Federation as the Burr Pit had been providing significant aid and were decisive in the civil war with Tewanta Company. He brought up the Pilots Federation records for this group of independent pilots, a broad range of combat ability from elite to harmless, with the median at competent, and far too many masters for comfort. He then did a search for ships belonging to the group that had been spotted in the system. He took a drink from his coffee mug, his mouth suddenly dry. They had a lot of ships in the system. Cargo transports, passenger liners, and way too many military vessels. Too many of those were large ships, corvettes and anacondas. There were too many heavy fighters, vultures, chieftains, and fertilances in there too. And too many combat-capable multi-role ships like Crate Mark IIs and Pythons. Missing this buildup of ships was another mistake. Central Command would not look kindly on that. With a growing sense of dread, he searched tactical databases for tactical analyses of the BYRNE Protectorate. There was very little to go on and barely any video. Survivors of the Tewanta Company Defense Forces mentioned that correspondents and spec op forces were specifically targeted. Once those were disposed of, the remaining forces were mopped up quickly. It made grim reading, 80 to 90% casualty rates. But there was very little in the way of tactical analysis. The survivors were mostly ships that arrived just before the retreat orders were issued. The one correspondent that escaped was so badly damaged that its recording equipment was destroyed. He racked his brain for some source of tactical intel. Wait a minute, he thought. Wasn't one of those commanders a video journalist? He did a search on Galnet and found footage of a pirate clearance operation in Acellus Primus. As he watched, blood drained from his face. They attacked in groups, focusing devastating fire on their targets. While not as clean and clinical as he was taught in the academy, it was equally effective, and more unpredictable. They tore anacondas apart in seconds. Light strike fighters were unable to avoid them. Medium-sized ships also didn't last. "Randomius help us," he said aloud. Perhaps it would be prudent to move office after all.
Wilson Port, Tewanta, July 13th, 3305, 0017 AM Galactic Standard Time. George walked home from his job in the docking area of Wilson Port. He'd been working the late shift, was tired, and was looking forward to his food cartridge, and perhaps a beer at his apartment. Apartment was probably too grandiose of a term for where he lived. Capsule suited it better. It was just short of 120 cubic meters in size, with a small bunk, a toilet shower area, and a tiny desk and food preparation station. It was situated toward the center of the station, where the gravity effect of the station's spin was low. That made it cheap, though he was managing to save a fair portion of his wages. The long-term goal was to move out to an Alliance colony somewhere, make a fresh start, and live a free man. Not that life in Wilson Port was bad. Citizens enjoyed a decent standard of living, and crime was low. However, the Order could be a bit stuffy and overly focused on service to the government. New ideas were not looked upon favorably, and alternative lifestyles were frowned upon. George always took the long way home. The direct route between the docks and his apartment was barely 5 minutes' walk, but that route stayed near the core of the station. George liked to take a detour outwards toward the edge, where he could feel a little load on his bones. That way also took him past various shops, which was handy normally, though at this time they were all closed. His longer walk normally took him about 20 minutes. He was a few minutes from home when he turned into a long and seldom used access corridor. In his 3 years working in the station, he had never met anyone while walking down it. He'd like to think of it as his own little secret passageway, though it wasn't very well hidden. It was just that nobody bothered to look for it. This passage ran parallel to the axis and was straight for about 150 meters. At the end was a holosign displaying inspirational messages, normally in a bold, white typeface on a plain black background. Currently, he could make out, "Cake leads to sloth." George walked along the corridor, his mag boots clunking on the metal floor. The sign changed its text smoothly. Now it read, "Cake is not nutritious food." It looks like the Order is kicking off another public health campaign, thought George. That didn't bother him, though, as he lived frugally anyway. However, the thought of having a slice of cake now was appealing. He walked on. Cake is a lie. They really were serious about it this time, thought George. He frowned a little. It was probably some young officer being overly zealous in interpreting his orders. He hoped that things wouldn't get too intrusive. That just set people on edge and didn't help anyone. Perhaps he should have that beer tonight after all, before it was flagged as a prohibited item. He was about 4 meters from the end of the passage, where it turned a corner to an access ladder to the level where his home was, when the sign glitched. The stock black background was replaced by a 2x2 grid of pale pink and yellow squares, and the text changed to a friendly red typeface. It read, "Tastes so good." Then, as suddenly as it appeared, it switched back to the previous message. George stared at the holosign for a few seconds. Did he imagine it? Was the sign hacked? Whatever had happened, it was best for him to be home in his apartment. He was definitely going to have that beer.